Your Excellencies, guests, and fellow colleagues, welcome to the CLC Lecture Series. My name is Mercy from the Center for Liveable Cities. The center was jointly established by the Ministry of National Development and the Ministry of the Environment and Water Resources in 2008 to distill, create, and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. The CLC Lecture Series is one of the platforms through which urban thought leaders share their ideas and exchange their best practices and experiences. So in today's session, we are very honored to have with us Mr. Carsten Haurum, Chief Executive Officer of the Culture and Leisure Administration in the city of Copenhagen. In this lecture, Mr. Haurum will share with us Copenhagen's strategies to incorporate culture and leisure in urban development in its aspirations to become the most livable city. And Mr. Haurum is part of a Danish delegation visiting Singapore, comprising mayors and CEOs of 6 major cities. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, and we hope you have a very fulfilling time in Singapore. So for today's session, we will have a presentation by Mr. Haurum, followed by a discussion and a Q&A segment with Mr. Kenny Ting. Mr. Kenny Ting will be our moderator for that session, and he is the Director of the Development Group at the National Heritage Board. So without further ado, may I invite Mr. Carsten Haurum on stage, please.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation. I've been looking forward to be here today. I've been looking forward to share some of the thought and some of the work that we do in Copenhagen and in the Copenhagen region with you today. As you just heard, I'm a part of a large delegation consisting of the 6 largest cities in Copenhagen. The basic discussion that we have in Copenhagen, of course, is also taken in other places in Denmark. So I'm sure the examples I will show you today is from Copenhagen, but you could go to some of the other cities and see maybe better examples of some of the things that I want to discuss with you today. So if you go to Denmark, don't hesitate to visit some of the other cities that have some pretty good examples too. What I'm going to present today is a lot of PowerPoints show. And that's a new thing for me too. And that's of course because I have to speak not in my mother tongue, that's of course Danish. I have to speak in English. And to be sure that you understand what I'm saying, I have brought a lot of PowerPoints to show what I'm saying. In fact, I have so many that I could make a movie out of it today. But we'll see, don't be nervous. I have talked to the technician and they will say, they do it all right, and they say there's no problem. So I think we can get through with all this without getting into severe damage. But let's start. The time is short. Copenhagen is like many other international cities who faces difficulties in terms of space. The city grows in terms of numbers, but the available space cannot follow or cannot grow in the same pace. Therefore, we as a city, and that could be Singapore, and that could be Copenhagen, many other cities, have to be very clever when we uses the ground around town, in the inner towns, and we also have to think new when we shall recycle, or we have to create solutions that have more than one purpose. But before I go into details in the discussion, I'd like to show you a short film. It was a film that we made in connection with our bid for the host UEFA European Football Cup Championship in 2020. Let's see the film and we'll be back.
In Copenhagen, we will encourage the future in 2020. We will use UEFA Euro 2020 to kickstart a football evolution in Europe. We will share our experiences in making football grow from the grassroots, show how to get new members, the future of football. In Copenhagen, nothing is far away. In 2020, we guarantee that you can reach every major spot within 20 minutes. Copenhagen is hassle-free. When you arrive in Copenhagen International Airport, the city centre is just 20 minutes away. Parken, the national stadium hosting the event, is in the centre of the city. Walk there, take the metro, or cycle like most Danes do. It takes 20 minutes from any major hotel or hostel in the city centre. Copenhagen is a vibrant and modern city. Copenhagen is known for its Nordic cuisine. We have 17 Michelin stars, but we're reaching for 20 in 2020. Danes are the happiest people in the world, and Copenhageners are good at partying. It doesn't take you 20 minutes to get a cold drink, more like 20 seconds. And no fan zone will be more than 20 minutes from Parken, our national stadium. Copenhagen will be football. The streets will be named after legends, and we invite the whole of Europe to join the party and celebrate 60 years of football progress. Denmark won the UEFA Euro in 1992. The Danes are looking forward to paying Europe back. Now it's our time. Let's encourage the future in Copenhagen 2020.
That's a good film. Yeah, you can clap. That's the feeling that you have. That's true. That's a perfect film seen with Danish eyes, because that's the way we like to see ourselves. That is the Copenhagen that we like to. When we see in the mirror, we see Copenhagen like that. And if you notice, if you take the first part away and the last part away, we're selling a lifestyle. It's a way of living that we're selling there, and it is that lifestyle that we want to keep also in the future. There's a lot of football in this film, of course. That was for the football bit, and we won. So you can go to Copenhagen in 2020 and see some European football. But the idea in this film is to say, when you talk about livability, we talk about this film. That this is the Copenhagen that we would like to show and to show to everybody else. But of course, we know, all of us, that a city does not content of those pictures alone. There's more to it than that. And that's why we in Denmark and Copenhagen have started the discussion, what type of city are we going to have in the future? The one, we discuss it in two major tracks, so to speak. The one track is the one you saw here. That we call it a great city. We call it a city. How can we keep this city also in the future? Copenhagen has the same problem than a lot of large cities. We grow very much. So the urbanization, we have to keep this city in spite of the urbanization. And then we talk about smart city. We talk about smart citizens. We talk about smart public service. We talk about a lot of things, but the major issue is, can we keep that city also in the future when the demands for land, demands for everything is raising, and can we make this film also when I come next year or I come in 10 years? That's the one main track, and of course there's some line under, and I'll come and I will give you some example of some of the lines under. The other major track is something somehow different. If you make a film, as you saw, if you make a city, or try to make a city as that you saw on the film, you risk that you have a city that is so planned that it's getting boring. That the people get bored because everything is based to have this livability. Therefore, we also work in another main track, and we call it developing city, or a city and an edge. You have to have a city who can provide something else than what we city planners can do. A city who can provide some unforeseen, some unknown, something that the citizen doesn't even know that they ask for. And that kind of city is pretty difficult to make. So we work in both tracks. The one is livability, with all the issues there, green and all the stuff. And then we work with the issue, a city on an edge. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'll try to do today. I'll try to show you some examples, not all of it, not in all groups, but some examples of what we are doing in the different areas in Copenhagen. But it's important that you remember the two tracks. That's what we are striving at. If you talk about a great city and you talk about livability, we also talk about using their city. In Copenhagen, and I think in many of the Danish cities today, the demands for using the city is very high. The citizen wants to be able to use their city, a city where you only can live and work and buy stuff is not enough. So we try to support the Copenhageners in using their city in many, many different ways. We're talking about the streets, we're talking about the water, we're talking about the front in the harbor and so on. How can we translate that in different areas into areas where the people can use it? You can say that the basic idea is that the city is a place where you meet. You, of course, here in Singapore have some advantages with the climate, I must say. It's a bit warmer here than I'm used to back home. We see that later. But in spite of that, we have another climate. We have to make or build a city that the people can use. And that's one of the things that we want to do. The users of city, we can see that every year when we have what we call the Harbor Festival. That's a very big festival in Copenhagen. It's one of the biggest in Denmark. More than 100,000 people visit Copenhagen in those 3 days. We have more than 250 activities, and we have a lot of people coming from abroad. That's from other parts of Denmark, but also from Norway and Sweden and Germany. They come and they are part of this Harbor Festival. The Harbor Festival includes a lot of swimming, a lot of things, recreational activities in the water and besides the water. We have dancing on the streets here. We have biking, we have skateboarding, we have basketball. We have a lot of stuff going on at the waterfront. And the people are crazy about it. It have been so huge success. So now in the coming 3 years, we put another 3 million Singapore dollar to make it a festival all year round. Now it's only in the summer. That's because due to the climate. But we will try to translate the idea to go all year round. Also when we go into the winter, where the weather is different in Denmark. I have so many papers here. The use of the city, the use of the water is very important. We have a clean harbor in the middle of the town. We can swim in the harbor, and that's why we have built the 3 official harbor pools, you can say it, and we put them around in the city. The one you see here on the picture is one called an Islands Brygge. It's in the middle. It's about 300 meters from the town center, and it's by far the most popular we have in the town. You can sit in the center, have a cold beer, take a city bike, go over a bridge, and then you can go swimming in the water if that's what you want. By the way, this was one of the first work of Bjarke Ingels. At those days he was a kid. Nobody knew him. Now he's a world star, but that's one of the first works that he did. I've talked a little about, I mentioned the climate a couple of times, but the water is also there in the winter. So we have what we call spots along the beaches and also in the harbor where people can find something to do in the winter. And that's the way that they look. This is an example from a spot along the water, and that's where clubs and individuals meet during the winter, and they jump in the water. It is cold. It is cold. The white stuff is snow and ice. I don't know if you know that here in Singapore. That's white and snow, and it is cold, I promise. But it's very popular, and I think we will build some more. Again, based on the fact that we have to use the city as a meeting place all year round, and not only in July and August. We have to use it also later, also when it gets cold. And these things, it's a way to do it. I'll admit, I haven't tried it yet. But maybe I'll try it before I come the next time. The streets are a very important issue when we talk about using the town. Streets, parks, boulevards, squares, we use that in increasingly speed. People use it for barbecue, of course, for partying, for having beer, and when they listen to music. Now there's a new, we support the small festivals in Copenhagen all year round with about 3 million Singapore dollar. One of the festivals is called Distortion, and you have to take the words as I said. Is it Distortion? It's 300,000 people partying in the streets of Copenhagen. A lot of young kids think that's the best thing that happened that year. A lot of the people who live in the streets where they're partying think that's the worst thing that happened that year. That gives some conflicts, but basically it's a good idea and we support it. The people have to make some party and we try to regulate it a little bit, but basically they use the streets to make party for 3 days in July. Out of the 300,000 people joining this festival, about 10% comes from abroad, so there's also money into this. You can also use that to earn money, but that's not the main reason. The main reason that we try to make the city they can meet in the city. Livability in a broad sense, that's of course, when you talk about green, that's of course one of the very hard issues in Copenhagen. And the conscious urbanization of Copenhagen means that we have to keep that in our eye all the time. We try to do that, and when we're doing that, we also have to try to optimize the use of our facilities. We are constantly thinking of new ways of improve the facilities that we have, and maybe we can make more out of them than we do today. Here I have a map showing some areas of Copenhagen. The big red areas at the top, that's a new area that where we reclaim land, just like you do in Singapore. We are building a new metro in Copenhagen. All the earth or the ground, I would say, we put up in the north, and that will be a new part of the city. It will contain 40,000 living houses and 40,000 workplaces in the next 2 decades. That's a total new part of the town, and that's one of the way, of course, increasing by claiming land. I think it might be easier in Copenhagen because the water is not that deep. We are far further from Sweden than you are from Malaysia, but we approach Sweden too, but we'll see what they say when we're too close. Recycling is a part of livability, and recycling, we do a lot of that in Copenhagen. We try to recycle buildings, we try to recycle areas, and we try to recycle everything we can, not only from a point of green, a green view, but also recycling. So we say the urbanization that is coming up, can we use the buildings that we had in another way or in a better way than we have done so far? And I have a couple of examples here, some you might be interesting. This here is a chapel. It's a chapel that was constructed in 1908 with a crematorium inside, and have worked as such until, I think, around year 2000. 2000, it was too little. The space within the chapel and the crematorium itself, it got too small, and it was therefore closed. It was standing there, and nobody really knew what to do with it until the city and some private investors and the local community who claimed their right to the chapel. They said all their parents and so on was buried or burned there, so it was theirs. They had a lot of ideas, but out of that, the private investors, the city, and the local community came a dance chapel. We restored. The outside is remaining. It looks exactly as they have done all the 100 years, but we have renovated the inside. So now today we have a real perfect dance chapel. We have showcases for modern dance. There's a lot of urban dance and modern dance, and what do I know? They dance a lot of different things out there. And the dance chapel also works to develop new dance, new modern dance, and train young talents within dance and different things. We also have a cooperation between the dance chapel and schools, but the basic line here is we transformed a former building to something that could be used in a modern society. Copenhagen have, as a lot of other old cities, a big meatpacking district. Former, they brought the animals in, that got slaughtered, and then the meat was sent out to the cities and the citizens and the restaurants. That, of course, we don't do anymore. So we stand there with a huge area in the middle of Copenhagen to say, what are we going to use with that? That was the way it looked when we took it over, and there was a lot of discussion going, because there's still some enterprises down there. There's still some butchers. There was still some fish stuff down there. So we have to mix, and it was closed. We want to open it up, and we have to this mixture between business, meat, people partying, restaurant, galleries, and there's a lot of exciting things, and I will not mention everything here. But how should we transform that? We did that in different ways, but one of the ways we did it was to involve some of the people living in the same area, and say, what is that going to be? What shall it be? because it's not without cost to make a party zone. There's people living around, and music 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning is only very funny if you are part of it. If you try to sleep, it's not very funny anymore. But that was the way it looked. We transform it. That's the way the meatpacking street look today, where you can have people to go and eat, they go drink, and they can do a party, and they can do a lot of things, and they do that. We have problems with the clash between some of the business and the people partying, but the problem is there to be solved, and they are slowly they are solved. So I think now nobody can imagine that it's not going to be the place it's going to be. We're also talking about small and well-established galleries who come and grow, and they make something between the buildings. We talk about new galleries, we talk about open space exhibition, we talk about a lot of things that's going on down there. It's very exciting. Music, meat as a eating, there's a good restaurant, there's music, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I do think that would be one of the most expensive areas to buy a house in within a few years. The price have been rising for the housing because it's so attractive to live near this area. So the complaints from the citizens is not that many that have been. Now they have seen that their apartments goes up. They understand the value of doing stuff like it. Another very big project we have in Copenhagen is the Carlsberg city, or the Carlsberg. Carlsberg, you probably know it, it's a beer. Probably the best beer in the world. We can have a commercial here, commercial break. Probably the best beer in the world. Carlsberg beer is no longer produced in the old brewery grounds used to be centrally located in Copenhagen. Now they moved out to Jutland, and that's far away. Now I'm fired when I get back home. Carlsberg City is the name of the city, and that's it. That's the way it looks. It's a very big area, and there's a lot of factory, a lot of stuff, and that we want to transform that to a total new city. There would be a city, or a part of the city, with 10 to 15,000 people living there. Due to the very old buildings we have there, we also have a lot of possibilities to put in culture and leisure stuff. And so we try to do the same thing that you saw in a small scale with the chapel. We try to renovate. We let the outside stand, and we try to renovate it inside. Here's a picture of how it's going to be. We're not that far now, but when it is finished, it will be something like this, and it will contain around 15,000 people with everything that belongs there. Leisure activities is one of the things that is very high priority. We have a high priority here in Carlsberg City because it is so central in the Copenhagen area as such. The buildings I told about here is very beautiful buildings. They built the founder of Carlsberg earned tremendous lot of money, but he was very interested in culture, so he paid a lot of money to make the buildings and contributed also to art. But we try to keep the building as they are, and then make something different inside. That could be art. That could be art exhibition. That could be whatever. The big point here is it's not the city who decides what's going to be inside the building. There, where we're going to have art or culture. Is going to be partly market-based, but also what the people can put into the buildings when they see the possibilities. There's a lot of possibilities in that Carlsberg city, and I'm sure if you go to Copenhagen and come to Copenhagen within the next 5 or 10 years, you will see a city park grow up there, and I have very high expectation to that project out there. We also have crazy things, of course. One thing is to recycle Carlsberg and use this huge area, but we also do crazy things in Denmark sometimes. Not enough, but we do something. One of the things that we do when we talk, that's very new project. My mayor know what I'm talking about. That is that we will build a ski run on top of a power plant. That is, of course, crazy. It's not stupid, but it's crazy. There's two ideas. The one idea is that the power plant, of course, is placed in a remote part of Copenhagen, where there's a lot of industry. People do not normally get out there. Now we want to use the huge chimneys there are, and between them we build this all-year ski run. And you can also go bicycling and all this stuff. Now, of course, there's two things about it. The one thing that it's a statement in a city that would like to be CO2 neutral in 25. Then on top of the energy producing plant, you can have ski or you could do leisure activities. And the other is, of course, to move something out in an area of Copenhagen where nobody comes. Today, we hope that this would be a reason to come out there. This is a picture made by the architect. The architect, in fact, he is also Bjarke Ingens, and he's very good of making pictures, so the politicians say, oh, such a thing, I must have such a thing as fast as possible. But we will see, Mr. Mayor, I think it would be a good idea, I better say that, as a long flight back home. So it is a good idea, but it's a crazy thing, and I'll see if that gets true to the reality, and I think it does because there is money behind it now. So in a couple of years you can go skiing in Copenhagen all year round. We'll see how that will, we'll see. That was the one lane, water, streets, old industrial areas. How can we transform them and use them to provide enough space for this urbanization to the people who are coming into Copenhagen right now? The other main track is what we call a developing city or a city with an edge. And that's a little bit more difficult somehow. That's when we're moving out of the planner's side, not totally, but we start to moving out. But some of it we can still control, and one of the lines under that we call the complex city. And that's the way how to densify the city. Now more people coming in, and that's of course something that you're very good at here in Singapore. That's why we're enjoying coming here to learn from you too. How can we densify the city on a smart way? This picture you have here is a very good example of people who have used their education and their brain when they did something in Copenhagen, because that's a place in an area in Copenhagen where there's not that much place. So what they've done here is to build a supermarket in the bottom, on the street level. Next level, second level, they have built a sports facility where you can do different kinds of sports. And at the top, they have apartments, very expensive apartments where people can live. That means that they have three different functions in the same house. They use all the space that they got. And I think that's a very good example on somebody, and it was not me, somebody have used all their skills to think of a smart way to densify the city. It's not everybody in Copenhagen or in Denmark that use their brains and their skill all the time. I have another example here placed in the middle of Copenhagen, next to Tivoli. Everybody knows that if you've been in Copenhagen, and next to the central station. And there we built a kindergarten. In the very heart of Copenhagen, we built a kindergarten. We have a lot of kindergartens, a need for kindergartens, of course, because the population is growing. And what did they do there? They built, and it's hard to see in the picture, but the lower building is the kindergarten. And you see the buildings next to is 4 and 5 stocks buildings. And what they did there was that they only used 1.5 store. And that means that all the air above the kindergarten is no use in the center of Copenhagen. And if you compare that with the other example where somebody really have thought about how can we use all the space that we have, this is a very good example of what we should not do. The kindergarten itself got an architectural award and is a very beautiful one and very functional, but it do only use a little bit of the space available and not the rest. And that's why I think it's a very good example of what we're doing wrong sometimes in Copenhagen. Here is the school department making something for themselves and not something for the city. And that's, I do think you have the same problems in Singapore too. We think, of course, in the silos that we are hired in, and we're not always thinking so for the city's sake, but we think for the problems that we have to solve. Soccer is very popular in Denmark. In Copenhagen, we have no way whatsoever to have the same amount of grass that you can have outside Copenhagen. That's obviously. So what we're doing right now is we change the surface from natural grass to artificial grass. That gives us the possibility to play football all year round, even when it's snow. It gives us a lot more time on the soccer fields. So that's an example on how we change traditional way of thinking from grass to artificial grass, because we can never have all this football fields in Copenhagen, so people have to wait and all this stuff. This is a way to make it possible to play a lot more football in Copenhagen all year round. The uncontrollable city. This is the part that I like very much. It even here, an excuse if you can say that here in Singapore, it starts to become sexy. The question is, how can you as government or city control the uncontrollable city? That's the big question. Cities planners, bureaucrats as myself, we are very, very good when we talk about the stuff that we can do from the place where we sit. But we are not the best to make the future of the city. You have to involve your citizens. You have to also to have a city that have the other side of that coin I was speaking of in the very beginning. It's not enough to have everything planned. There must also be space where people can plan for themselves. And then the question is, how much can we let go? Can we have areas in Copenhagen or in Singapore where we say, okay, it's yours, let's see what happens if we move most of the rules. When I say that back home in Denmark, the people in one of the departments, they have a lot of rules why it cannot be so. But if you want to create a city for the future, you have to let the people be a part of it. Because otherwise, I think you risk to have a planned city and maybe a city who can be a little bored. One of the examples is here. There was an old factory occupied with some young people who have made a lot of different stuff inside this factory. It's not all legal. It's almost legal. We do it as legal as possible, but we support it because it was their own initiative. They got it in the way that they wanted. Of course, we have regulation for fire and all this stuff, but basically they can do whatever they want in this building, and I think I can say that's a pretty good success. We also have another area, you might know it, it's called Christiania, and that's a big area. It was occupied in the beginning of the 70s. It was a former military base. When the military left, some young people with good ideas, they occupied it, and they've been there since that time. And in that area, there's no rules whatsoever. That, of course, is a problem when you discuss. But on the other hand, we have a part of the city, it's one of the most visited part of the city in Copenhagen, where people go to see how can you live if you live outside the society. And you can buy everything out there. I will not tell you what you can buy, but you can buy everything. You can be sure of that. Even your own bike. That's true. The idea here again is even you can discuss Christiania because it maybe have become to something else that it was thought to be. But the basic idea is that you have to let go as authorities if you want to provide a city for the next century. And where the limits are, I do not know. The limits have to be pushed. And the limit have to be pushed not only by the people who want to live like that or have good ideas. The limit also have to be pushed by bureaucrats and city planners because they have the access to the decision maker and they have the access to the knowledge tool. So it won't, I mean, there's of course limits, but it's very interesting how far can we go in this way. I don't know. We'll see in the future, but we're starting and we're discussing that very much in Copenhagen right now. The last lane, I will not do very much for that, the connected city. We have a city, Copenhagen or Denmark is the same size as Singapore, and you can say we have many of the same problems. Copenhagen is a little open economy, so we have to be a part of this globalization that's all over, of course. We are a member of the European Union, we are part of the Scandinavian cities, so we benefit very much from this, but we also have to be connected with with other cities and other countries. Here you see the bridge. So we can talk about connection på macro level. This is a bridge to Sweden. It's very, as I said before, I think Malaysia is further away than Sweden are from Copenhagen. It's very close. We have a bridge there, and that means that the western part of Sweden is now melting somehow together with Copenhagen. Malmö is called over there, and it's been not a part of Copenhagen, but Greater Copenhagen. We count Malmö, but also. No, yeah, that's the next picture. That shows the picture that shows that the bridge to Sweden, but also in 2020 when we had this football stuff, there will be a bridge between Denmark and Germany connecting us very close to Hamburg and partly also to Berlin. And that means that you can go from Copenhagen with train to Hamburg in 2 or 2.5 hours. So you go down there, have your lunch and go home late evening. That of course opened a tremendous possibilities, but also, of course, there would be a lot of competition between Hamburg and Copenhagen in many ways. But I think that the cooperation between Hamburg and Copenhagen, and in reality between Hamburg and Denmark, will be very strong and very intensified when the bridge is done. On macro level, we connect Denmark with a lot of countries, but also on micro level, that was the bridge to Sweden we talked about before, but also on micro level, we will have to connect the city. Due to the many old industrial areas in Copenhagen, I've shown you a few here, who are currently developed, we have to tie the city better together, and so you can come from one part to another. This is done in many ways. One of them is shown here. That's a biking bridge. That's a bridge that connects the old city part. You can cross over the harbor, and you come out to a very green area. So you connect a part of the city which have been a working class part of the city who have been very isolated with the very green areas. This example on the picture is the so-called Big Snake is called, and it's only for bikes. So you can move throughout over the harbor and get out to the green. And that's when it comes to Copenhagen, you should try it. It's a pretty funny experience to go across the city in that way. A connected city, have you learned, also have to have easy access for foreigners like you who want to come to Copenhagen and to work. So we have this international house that is a one-stop entry for people coming to Copenhagen. I shall not go very far or very deep in that, but what's happening right now is due to the competition that we serve 25 other cities with this house. And we now talk about a greater Copenhagen, because Copenhagen is big in Denmark, but it's very small when you go outside. So Denmark is slowly getting more and more one unit. And we now serve 25 communes from this house. The time is running out, and I have to stop now so we can have a discussion. I just want to say here at the very end, to achieve a city that's walking on two legs, the livability that you saw in the film, and a city at the edge, or on the edge, it's not easy. A city where the unknown plays a part in the planning, where the unforeseen plays a part in the planning, and where you want to give people what they don't even know what they don't know how to ask for it because they don't know that they want it, is difficult. But it is around there you have to work as city planners. It is difficult. I've shown you a couple of examples here. We don't have the solution in Copenhagen, but we try to push the limits on how we can do it and how far we can go before somebody get very mad. I do think that the city who succeeds to walk on both legs in the future, and of course we have to consider where we come from, but a city who can walk on two legs in the future, they will have pretty good opportunity in the competition that is rising among cities all over the world. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Haurum. May I now invite Mr. Kenny Ting onto the stage, please, to join Mr. Haurum for the moderated discussion and Q&A segment. Ladies and gentlemen, during the Q&A, we ask that you please state your name and organization before you ask your question. You may raise your hand and our staff will walk to you with the microphones. I will now hand the time over to Mr. Ting.
Thank you very much again, Carsten, for a very thought-provoking narrative of what Copenhagen is about. Perhaps I think I'll start off by sort of telling you what some of my key takeaways were as a Singaporean. I think I found what was very moving about your presentation, the theme of balance that seems to run throughout, whether it's in terms of the high-level planning, where you're very clear that the city needs to be two things. It needs to be a great city, a city that's livable, a city that's green, a city that's planned, but also this sort of city that's full of surprises, it's unpredictable, it's full of serendipity, a city that is sort of exciting. And this balance seems to me to also go down all the way to the community level, where even for specific projects like the street festival, you have to balance the views of those who think it's the worst thing on earth and those who think it's the best thing on earth. So, I mean, I really applaud Copenhagen for this. We got a sense of that when we traveled to Copenhagen as a delegation a couple of months back. The second takeaway I have is, this relates to the first takeaway. The second takeaway I have is your point about us learning how to let go. And I think that speaks very, very, very movingly to where we are now in Singapore. I think that there has been a change in terms of what the public expects from the government in Singapore, and I think that both government and the public have taken very courageous steps to go where they haven't been before in terms of negotiating how that process of interaction and negotiation and collaboration needs to take place. And so my final point is a bit more frivolous. My final takeaway was this vision of myself in that harbor pool, which I also got to see when we visited Copenhagen a few months ago. And it got me thinking, imagining about how wonderful it would be if I could also swim in such a pool in Marina Bay. Why, I'd be there all the time. So that's all for me. Before I open up to the floor, I do have one question, perhaps to start this discussion going. And let me see where that went. My question is this. You did share a little bit about how you actually you shared a lot about these crazy ideas like ski slopes that you've managed to get off the ground. But oftentimes these, you mentioned that there are competing demands for use of land, and competing demands increasingly also for the use of funds, for public funds or private funds. Could you tell us more about how you actually advocate or communicate the value or benefits of these initiatives or events? How, in other words, do you sell the crazy to fundraisers and to the funders and to the politicians?
Sometimes it's easier to sell the crazy things to the politician than to the funds. But in that particular case with the ski run, in fact, it was my mayor, Carlsberg, who was a crazy person. Sorry, who insisted that was a good idea, and finally got some money for it, and now it will come true. But the way that we usually do it in Denmark, and I mean everybody, the politician and the civil servants and the people who are living there, is that if they are a good idea, we continue working on it, presenting it, talk about it, and if it is a good idea, sometimes I have 10 good ideas in my pocket, and sometimes suddenly you can have an open window for one, and you take it up and say, oh, I have a suggestion for that space or whatever. That's the one thing. The other thing I would like to mention is that leisure activities in broad sense, of course, it's difficult when you compete with schools and kindergartens and all the stuff that have to be built in the city too. But so we do a lot of work trying to convince the people in the economic department that culture and leisure is not something that you put on when you're finished with all the other stuff. That's a part of, it has a worth in itself, and they have to be in a city. And I will not say we have succeeded there now, but we have come so far now that we can say, we started to talk about that all the new areas I showed you here, we try to have 10% of the land reserved for culture and leisure activity. That will not happen. But now we're going to say it, we talk about it, and let's see in a couple of years it might happen. So that's the way we try. That's a crazy idea with 10% of the land, because that's very costly. You know that here in Singapore, I mean, you make a big park on a very costly piece of land in Marina Bay Sand. And that's the same thought I would like to take back home and say, come on, 10% at least, then we'll get 5.
Okay, on that note, may I open up the floor to questions? Sorry about that. Anyone? Any sort of questions you'd like to pose? Oh, yes, please, at the back. Calvin.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to Singapore. I spent a wonderful visit to Copenhagen as a student 10 years ago, and definitely the sense of openness and inclusiveness was something that I took away as an aspiring architect and planner. So in any city that's changing with a population that's very diverse, often it's those who speak loudest who have a voice at the table. So in a situation where there are competing demands on what kind of culture you have in the city, how do you think the city planner should go about maybe, having a better sense of those who, for whatever reason, don't speak in public? So beyond the sexy, funny, crazy, how about everybody else? Your thoughts, please. Oh, I'm Kelvin from the URA next door.
Are there any other related questions to this? Yes, please, sir. Over here.
Sorry, Raymond Kwok from ByteTownVC.com. I got questions related to the building of a city going forward in the future. Can you share with us your principle of what you keep and what you tear down? Because I hear that your basically the drawings that behind or pictures actually is not being used like what it is before. I think we are getting to a stage in Singapore that to decide. I think Kenny will be to share with us as well how Singapore look at things that we should keep and what are the things that we should embrace going forward.
Maybe a third and final question before he responds, and final for this round of questions. Anyone? Sir?
My name is Sascha Zehnder from NTU. I actually am wondering if your dance do work, because it's all party. But I like the philosophy. My question goes, actually, when you look into a livable city, has also to become a sustainable city. And sustainability is used kind of as a buzzword too much around the world for all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, a city has to use energy, it has to use resources. And how do you take that into account in planning? Do you have tools? Do you have special yardsticks with which you actually also put over your fun and livable part the resource use? Because we all struggle with that at the end of the day. It costs energy, it costs primary resources. How do you do that in Copenhagen?
Thank you. Over to you, Carsten.
Yes, thank you. First, to you, sir, about the space in the cities. How shall we do as planners? I'll say there's enough people who have there's some people who always at the table and say we want that and that and that. I think one of the planners' task is to talk for the people who don't talk. That's one of the to come up, put forward some projects or ideas for a certain area, whatever it must be, that have an alternative to what the strong forces say. That's the one thing I would say. That's what I expect of my own people and myself, that I'm able to see also the weak part here in the society. That's the one part. Then you can say in Copenhagen or in Denmark, we have a very integrated system of how we shall hear the citizen, and they come to the table with the ideas. We make competition where we call in for ideas for certain areas. So we have a long tradition for involving people in developing areas. And there we, of course, sometimes get, or we often get also something from the weak. The problem with that sometimes is that we get a lot of answers for the people saying, not in my backyard. We always get those people at the table. So what we're trying to now is to discuss how can we explore and how can we make these hearings better, so we also get in touch with the people who don't say, not in my backyard. we talk about people's vote, like we have heard from the United States, where we can vote about certain things and so on. There's a work starting now because exactly that question is very hard to answer. But the planners have a responsibility, the politicians have a responsibility to draw in the people that they represent. And at the end, of course, the politicians have to make the decisions on what's the right on a certain area. I hope that was a few answers to what you asked about. About which part of the city or which building that we should preserve and which we can tear down, that is not in my department. That's not in the city's department. We have so many authorities which only task in the life is to prevent anything from happening in Copenhagen. So that's not our problem. Our problem is the opposite. Sometimes that the forces are so strong that buildings and places are so we can't do anything about them. We have to find the compromise between the city with a lot more people in and what we have to preserve. That's of course a very tough discussion, but at this time in Copenhagen at least, and I think that will be for most of Denmark too, the forces that preserve is stronger than those who want to challenge. So that's the way I think it is in Denmark right now. About the environment, I would say that is a very high issue, a big issue in Copenhagen. As you probably know, we want to be the first CO2 neutral city, carbon neutral city in 25, and that's not far away. So in everything that we do, that is an angle we put down. When we have a lot of bikes. I showed this bike city. It's not easy to park a car in Copenhagen, and it will not become easier in the future. We would like to have this, or someone would like to have this ring like you have in Singapore, so that the car should pay to come in as to regulate the traffic. When we build new schools, new sports facilities, we have this as a very, very strict rules for how energy efficient they should be and so on. So in everything we do, we try to consider the different aspects of the environment. The thing that we have a lot of discussion now, right now, that's because due to the weather changes, we sometimes have a lot of rain in Copenhagen. Yeah, I know that you have that too here. We also have a lot of rain in Copenhagen sometimes. So much rain that the streets are flooded and so on. And our capacity is not, we cannot deal with that. So we have to invest billions of dollars in the next 10, 15 years to cope with that problem. That what they call the 1,000 years rain is now 100 years rain, and 100 year rain is every week or something like that. So in everything we do, because it would be a political failure for Copenhagen, who traveling around in the whole world and making commercial for 25 and CO2 neutral. So we do everything that we can to reach that goal. Yeah, I think that, so every plans have to go through this evaluation.
May I invite this next round of questions? Any thoughts or even comments, sir?
I'm Bruno Wildermuth, former transport planner. I'm very curious whether Copenhagen has a specific policy. It's such a friendly city for pedestrians and bicyclists versus compared to Singapore, for instance. Whether you have a specific policy that reflects how pedestrians and bicyclists should be treated versus cars.
Other questions? Ma'am, in red.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Victoria. I'm really curious about Christiana's Haven, and I'd like to ask what led to the development of it. What do you think of the future of Christiana's Haven, and do you think that there would be possibility of an expansion or a creation of another haven in that format? Thank you.
One more for this round. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Edward. I'd like to ask, in your opinion, Copenhagen is better or Singapore better? And then if Copenhagen is better, what Singapore can be improved, in your opinion? Thank you.
Very loaded question. In your opinion, is Copenhagen or Singapore better? And if, and if Copenhagen is better, how can Singapore be improved?
I'll take the first question first, and I'll think about it. To the question whether with the pedestrians and bicycle and cars, yeah, we have a bicycle politics, and it's a hard question to answer for civil servants. So I will balance now on the. No, I'll say, yeah, I think that the basics, the majority, my mayor is sitting down there, the majority in Copenhagen do want to reduce the numbers of cars coming in and coming out of Copenhagen, and do want the number of cars, reduce the number of cars inside Copenhagen. And that means, and then at the same time we think that moving on a bike is a good idea, not only due to traffic, but also due to health and other stuff. And Copenhagen is not that big. So you can do that all year round. If you go to Copenhagen, you will see you have to line up in queue to get over for the red signals when you bike. So the answer is yes, we have a politics, and the politics favored bicycles and pedestrian. As few cars as possible, I think that would be the majority's opinion if you go and ask the politician. Not that there should be no cars, but there should be a lot fewer cars and a lot more bikes. And that's why we invest a lot of money in bicycle lanes, and we try to not divide it, but we have pedestrians, where the pedestrian can walk, and then we have bicycle lanes, and then we have the cars. And the roads for the cars get narrower and narrower in Copenhagen. And and then of course bus lines, and we are building a new metro, now here for 3 billion or 4 billion Singapore dollar. So we make priority for the public transport and reduce the cars, and priority for the bicycles. And in fact, everybody go bicycling now, even CEOs and everybody go bicycling. You see people with tires and to meetings, and that's faster than go by car. So everybody go biking today in Copenhagen. It's not only a few people or a group. So bikes and not cars. That would be the politics. So short, I think. Yeah, that would be the answer. About Christiania and the future, that is a very, very tough question. Christiania have been there for now almost 40 years and have always been illegal in every aspect of life, almost. Originally it started because that was around the late 60s and start 70s as a try to make another type of society than the capitalist society. That was a way to try, can we have another type of life, another form of life built on some other values than those who were in the society outside. And that was a good idea to try that out. The discussion within the last 40 years has then been that Christiania maybe have moved more and more away from that thinking and more in another direction. And one could discuss today, and I do not know what exactly the truth are, but one could say or discuss today whether there's too much drug and too much problems out there, and less trying to make a new society, another society. There's not an alternative to the society anymore. So it's not a place you go now to live different. Maybe the role is over. There's a lot of opinions about that. Basically, now in these years, it's the government who owns Christiania, that was a former military base, make it legitimate as a legal, and what's going to happen in the future, I don't know, because if they have to buy their houses and so on, I mean, they look more and more like the rest of society, and maybe the dream is over. So it's about a dream who was there, and maybe it's not there anymore, and shall we close the dream? I don't know. That's a tough. I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't think that Christiania will continue being what Christiania are today. I don't think. There's too much drugs and too much things out there. Whether I prefer Copenhagen and Singapore. This is my 4th time in Singapore, and alone that shows that I like Singapore very much. And the pictures I show you from the water with the ice, that's the way it is right now in Denmark. So when we go back Thursday, so tomorrow, we land in that weather. I prefer Singapore. So in that sense, but I think that the reason that why the people from Denmark, and especially maybe from Copenhagen, are so often here in Singapore, that is, Singapore and Denmark have the same size. Singapore and Copenhagen have some of the same challenges, and some of the things that you do here in Singapore is really inspiring for us in Copenhagen, the way you exploit the land and so on. And that's why we like Singapore very much. I also would like to, if I were the chief commander in Singapore, maybe I would work a little on the second, the one on the edge. But I think I'll stop here. That was a, yeah.
May I invite more questions, comments? Yes, the gentleman in the check shirt.
Hi, my name is Fabian and I lead architecture walking tours in Singapore as a hobby. So my question is related to tourism. So there are lots of events where the city is forced to absorb, or the city is required to absorb a lot of tourists in a very short period of time, like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival maybe, or Formula One in Singapore. So for Copenhagen, I'm curious if that's the direction you would like to head towards, or not so much. So I'm not sure how much the Harbour Festival, how many people visit versus the resident population. So events where tourists might overwhelm the local population, what do you think of that? Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Yes, the gentleman in white.
Hello, I'm Francisco. I'm a researcher at SMART MIT Research Center here in Singapore. The area where I work is in future urban mobility, so my question relates to transportation and this tension between commuting patterns and leisure patterns. Commuting patterns and non-commuting patterns. So from your presentation, it's clear that the non-commuting habits of the city are very important to you, but those also bring implications in terms of the transportation and in terms of the efficiency of the mobility of the city. For example, it's much easier to plan, schedule for buses and so on for the commuting patterns, right? While for the events, it's going to be a lot dynamic. It has to be dynamic. So how much are you planning on that direction? Are you having like fixed schedules, heading on a direction where the public transport is itself more dynamic, or not so much?
So this is a question, to what degree are transportation plans sort of fixed or flexible, if I'm sort of interpreting that more or less? How fixed or are plans related to transportation?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the planning, how are you being able to plan for the dynamic side of movement, basically?
Okay. One final one? Yes, the lady behind.
Hi, my name is Amaria. I'm also from the URA. My question is leisure still an affordable thing for most of the people in Copenhagen? I think one interesting thing that you pointed out was that you like to seek out the views of the people in the developing parts of Copenhagen. And here I think we want to do the same, but at the same time, the regeneration of an area can then lead to them being excluded from then using the city. So how do you balance that? Thank you.
Yes. Tourism and events first. I'll say the reason why we won that group play in the football European Championship in 2020, that was because Copenhagen throughout the last 10 years slowly have moved up the ladder when we talk about big events. So we would like to go on that road too, but the events that we want to have to Copenhagen shall be events that somehow is working with the politics. That means we will never have a Formula One race in Copenhagen, because that would not be appropriate when we talk about CO2 neutral and all this stuff. I'm not talking about the money. We had the World Championship in bicycling on the road and all the disciplines are there, and we used a lot of efforts on that one, because then we could have let the Copenhageners ride on bikes on the same routes than the people who the big guys who are good at bicycle riding. We had the half marathon World Championship running inside in the middle of Copenhagen, and after the very big good runners, the professional runners, came the Copenhageners and then one after, because running and healthy way of living is a part of the Copenhagen way of thinking ourselves. So yes, the events track We will exploit that much more in the coming years, but the events that we go for and go after shall be something that we can recognize ourselves in as normal citizens. So we will not have events that is far away from the politics or from the mentality. That would be something that where we can see ourselves, and we are very good at arranging things at the site, so the city as such participates in the events. That also means it's pretty easy to close the town down in 2 or 3 days, because people try and go on the same routes and so on, so they accept that it disturbs the normal life when the big events are in Copenhagen. I think that the football is not the whole European, it's one group play we have, will be one of the biggest events that we will have in Denmark when concerning about tourists and press and so on. And I don't know how much further we can go as a small country and small city. It's also a question of resources, of course, but yes, events we do, and we do think that attract tourists to us. That's a part of it, that they attract tourists, but it's also that we think that a city, we would very much like to be a metropole. And we are, I think, about 50,000 inhabitants on the right side, so we are a metropole, but a small one of the kind. And we have to have events. We are building an arena now, so we can have big events indoor too. We would like to be a city who also can contain events, and also big events, but they have to be something that we can see ourselves. About the transport, if I understood the question correct, how not transport, how we decide how dynamic something should be and where. If I understand your question correct, we do not plan that. That might be the difficult side about it. How do you control the uncontrollable city? Because if you start to plan it with all the skills that are sitting in this room and the bureaucrat skill, then it's not longer uncontrollable. So you have to find this balance between let go, see through fingers with some rules maybe, not the law of course, but some rules. Let people do things that they did before, they were not allowed to do before, and then see what happened. Christiania is the example that it went maybe too far, at least 40 years before something happened. But in 40 years, they have almost done whatever they wanted out there. And we have areas of the town where people have occupied a house, or where the police don't take them out immediately, but we'll let them stay as long as it's acceptable. Of course, the power is there, the police and so on. So it's a very harsh question. And my colleagues back home, when I say this, of course, the people who have this responsibility, all the different buildings stuff and planning, I mean, they don't like to hear this. So it's also a struggle. But I think you have to have some places in the city where people who are not the livability film can stay and can live their lives. I don't know how many who have been in Berlin, but it's not the city planners who have planned Berlin. If you go to Berlin today, it's a fantastic cultural city. And what's happening in Berlin, God, it's amazing. But it's not the city who have planned that. That's the citizens who have made that in Berlin. I know they have extraordinary historic circumstances where there were buildings and all this stuff from the former East Germany, East Berlin. But basically, Berlin today and the success of Berlin have been shaped by the people and not by the Berlin community. And there's some of that sort I would like to take more into the Danish discussion than we have. So plan it, we do not plan it, we fight for it. The last question was about whether you can afford, or what about the afford. In Denmark, everything is public in the sense. We have another system than you have here. All the facilities in Copenhagen or in whole Denmark, when you talk about sports facilities, libraries, cultural facilities, they are basically free, built and paid and run by the local authorities. Then we do not, in Denmark we are organized in clubs, that's the English word for that, which is volunteers clubs. And it's run by volunteers. They get support from the local community, but basically when the kids go from school and go to do sports or whatever, they go places that's run by voluntary people. So it's not a question whether you can afford it in Denmark, as long as you talk about all the ordinary stuff, because everybody can afford it, it's almost free. So that's not a question today. It's more a question, there's too many that not use these facilities. There's too many people, young people, who sit back and get fat and so on. We have the same problem everywhere in the world. So we would like more young people to participate. But it's not a question of money. It's a question of there's so many opportunities, and not everybody likes to play football.
Sure. I think we have time for a final round of questions. So, sir, the gentleman in white behind.
I haven't been called a man in white before. Thank you. I want to ask, Ken Hickson's my name, I run a sustainability consultancy here. One question that no one else has asked, and I maybe in the climate that's currently existing, regarding waste from events, and that Singaporeans seem to have some difficulty, and foreigners who happen to be attending these events seem to have some difficulty in managing the waste, and perhaps making the assumption, which we all do, I think, that someone's going to clean up after us. So how has Copenhagen, and how has Denmark for that matter, managed the waste situation, particularly relating to big events? When you have your football event in 2020, you're having a lot of visitors, you're having a lot of people in the streets. So how do you manage? Do you do it in the way of encouraging people to take care of their own waste, or do you just have a massive army of cleaners like Singapore seems to rely on?
Any other questions, comments from the back? If not, sir, maybe. Yeah.
Sorry, I hope you don't mind. Singapore is the second world fastest aging populations, and I think that we are thinking about how we do the planning going forward. Can you share with us how Denmark, Copenhagen is doing it? Because I don't have the statistics whether in the city, Copenhagen or Denmark is likely the same as the aging statistics. Second related one is that I saw the pictures in Denmark. Most of the buildings are about 4-story high, if I'm not wrong, and no lift. Now, in Singapore, we are a small city, so ours is density. I like one of your slides about density and livability. Can you share with us how we can learn from each other?
Can I invite one final question, which is likely to be the final question for this session? Anyone from the back? If not, I will take this for myself. So my question I had, which I wanted to ask you too, Carsten, was about how you sort of measure and present the success of these initiatives, this major culture and leisure initiatives.
Yes. First about the waste, that is a very good question, tough question, because we have a lot of discussion about that, and we're getting better on that. We use a variety of instruments, you can say, but basically we end up, the city pays for it all. That's the basic question. That's the basic answer for you. Now when we talk about, when we apply for an event, and or we get an event, we have special pages where we're discussing who's going to do what with the waste. But basically, if we do it ourselves, we pay our people to do it, or we give money to people who do it, because it is a tremendous problem for the people who live there if it's not taken care of. So basically, we pay it from the city. Then on top of that, of course, we try to do this modern thing here, notching, I learned about. And so we try to, with waste cans, and we do a lot of things so people could put their waste themselves. But when the day is over, we pay for the cleanup some way or another. And it's a very big part of the budget when we have events. And I think it's very important that you do that, because if you don't clean up the city after the events, the citizen will very fast say, no, we don't want to have the events. So it's a very important question, and we try to deal with it, and we discuss it, and we fight, and so on. But basically, we clean up ourselves. And then we try all the other things in the middle. About skyscrapers, it's true, it was a very good, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, you're only allowed to build up to 4 or 5 stocks, at least in the old city, or the most of the city. That's due to the history way back. We have a lot of buildings with copper roofs, and they get green and all this stuff, so if you build high, you can't see them anymore. So that's, we call it a human scale. We're building within a human scale. So what you see here in Singapore, you'll never see in Copenhagen. There was no way. We have some discussion about it, but that would not be in the Copenhagen we know today. That would be in maybe in Nordhavn. I showed you the red spot very up in the top. We have another island lying out in Øresund, the water between Sweden and Denmark. Refshaleøen is called. Maybe in the future that will be our Manhattan. You can build it out there, but you cannot build it inside Copenhagen. I think it would also be stupid to do it because we have this beautiful old building from the 15th, 16th, and 17th century that would disappear if you build this. So this is a place where there's a lot of discussion. So what we have to learn to Singapore, we have to learn from you, that is to how to build higher houses, because we have to build that somewhere in the future, somewhere, if the urbanization is still continuing. So I think there's a question of what we can learn from you, because we don't have a tradition. We have 1 or 2 high houses. Otherwise, we don't have the tradition for building them, and we don't have the mentality right now. It's too big for us, I think. But it will come because we're forced to think about density also in that sense you mentioned there. So we'll come here another time and learn some more. I don't think we can learn you anything there. And then was your last final question. That was how we were measuring the success. That's a good question. I'm against measuring the success. At least that's what I'm saying when I'm sitting towards the finance people, because they only want a lot of schedules to see it. My basically idea is that culture and this kind of stuff you can measure. But of course, if you have an event, you can measure how many people came to the city during that event. There's a lot of things you can do, of course, so you can have some statistic. But somehow I think that culture and leisure also is built on beliefs. And we in Copenhagen and in Denmark believe that culture, as I said before, culture and leisure in its broad sense is a part of life. It's necessary to have this to have a good city. It's not the cream on top of the cake. It's a part of the cream inside the cake. You cannot take out the culture. You can put it this way, and that should be my final remark. I can mention a lot of big cities in the world who have no welfare system, but I can name any city who don't have any culture. But you can name every city, despite the size, will have culture from the very ancient times. So culture is so integrated part of our lives, and that of being human beings. So it should not be measured only enough so the finance people bring in the money.
Thank you, Carsten. I think that was the perfect way to actually, as you said, end off this discussion. Again, I think what the questions and your responses has done is actually sort of reinforce the importance about balancing the planned versus the unpredictable parts of the city. This often takes place through compromise. I think something else that came through very strongly for me, especially when you said that we support events that we can recognize ourselves in as ordinary citizens, is just how strong a sense of identity Danes, as well as perhaps, I don't know what the term is, Copenhageners, is that right? Copenhageners have as Danish and in their city. And I think the third point, which I took away today, was the point that you concluded with I think, which is that culture isn't the cream on the cake, it is the cake. Right? With that, I think Excellencies, friends and colleagues from other departments as well as from beyond, please, may I request a round of applause for Mr. Carsten Haurum, the CEO of the Culture and Leisure Administration, City of Copenhagen. And may I hand it back to Mercy.
Thank you, Mr. Haurum and Mr. Ting, for sharing your insights and experiences with us. May I now invite Mr. Koo, Executive Director for the Center for Liveable Cities, up on stage to present them the tokens of appreciation, please. May we also now invite Her Excellency, Ms. Berit Besser, and the rest of the Danish delegation up on stage for the photo taking, please.